Hello, St. Peter's. Welcome back for our third week of January for our chapter book series. We're in the middle of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. We have read the first 4 chapters. Last week, we learned about Fudge being the family dog when he refused to eat and he was only eating under the table until his dad finally took matters into his own hands and dumped that cereal over his head. That was pretty funny. And then in the next chapter, Fudge thought he was going to be a bird, and while Peter and the 2 friends from school were watching Fudge on the playground, not very well, Fudge jumped off the top of the jungle gym and he busted out his 2 front teeth. His mom got really upset with him and kind of hollered at him. Peter was not happy about that, but guess what? The next day, his mother apologized. So, see, even grown-ups can make mistakes. They can say things that they don't really mean. But if we apologize and we take responsibility, we can move on. So I'm excited to see what fun adventures we have with Peter and Fudge today in chapters 5 and 6. My friends are here. They're hanging out in the books today. Ralph and Magic Monkey. They have been waiting for this to happen today. I've got Daisy and Joy standing over here on the bookshelf with our jar of joy, of course. We'll do that at the end. All right, so settle back, relax, take a breath, get a cup of hot chocolate as we read the next 2 chapters of Judy Blume's Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Chapter 5 is called The Birthday Bash. I got used to the way Fudge looked without his top front teeth. He looked like a very small first grader. Dr. Brown, our dentist, said he'd have to wait until he was 6 or 7 to get his grown-up teeth. I started calling him Fang because when he smiles, all you can see are the top 2 side teeth next to the big space. So it looks like he has fangs. My mother didn't like that. I want you to stop calling him Fang, she told him. What should I call him? I asked. Farley Dressel? Drexel? Just plain Fudge will be fine, my mother said. What's wrong with Farley Drexel? I asked. How come you named him that if you don't like it? I like it fine, my mother said. But right now we call him Fudge, not Farley, not Drexel, and not Fang. What's wrong with Fang? I asked. I think it sounds neat. Fang is an insult. Oh, come on, Mom. He doesn't even know what a fang is. But I know, Peter, and I don't like it. Okay. I promised never to call my brother Fang again. But secretly, whenever I look at him, I think it. My brother, Fang Hatcher. Nobody can stop me from thinking. My mind is my own. Fudge is going to be 3 years old. My mother said he should have a birthday party with some of his friends. He plays with 3 other little kids who live in our building. There's Jenny, Ralph, and Sam. My mother invited them to Fudge's party. Grandma said she'd come over to help. My father couldn't make it. He had a Saturday business appointment. I wanted to go to Jimmy Fargo's, but my mother said she needed me to supervise the games. The kids were invited from 1 until 2:30. That's only an hour and a half, my mother reminded me. That's not so bad, is it, Peter? I don't know yet, I told her. Ask me later. The kitchen table was set up for the party. The cloth and napkins and paper plates and cups and they all matched. They had pictures of Superman on them. Right before the party time, Grandma tried to change Fudge into his new suit. But he screamed his head off about it. No suit, no suit, no. My mother tried to reason with him. It's your birthday, Fudgy. All your friends are coming. You want to look like a big boy, don't you? While she was talking to him, she managed to get him into his shirt and pants. But he wouldn't let her put on his shoes. He kicked and carried on until my mother and grandmother were both black and blue. Finally, they decided as long as he was in his suit, his feet didn't matter. So he wore his old bedroom slippers. Ralph arrived first. He's really fat, and he isn't even 4 years old. He doesn't say much either. He grunts and grabs a lot, though. Usually his mouth is stuffed full of something. So the first thing Ralph did was wander into the kitchen. He looked around for something to eat, but Grandma was guarding the place. She kept telling him, "No, must wait until the other children come." Jenny arrived next. She was wearing little white gloves and party shoes. She even carried a pocketbook. Besides that, she had on dirty jeans and an old sweater. Her mother apologized for her clothes, but said she couldn't do anything with Jenny lately, especially since she had taken to biting. "What does she bite?" I asked, thinking about furniture or toys or stuff like that. "She bites people," Jenny's mother said. "But you don't have to worry about it unless her teeth go through the skin. Otherwise, it's perfectly safe." I thought, oh, poor old Fudge. He can't even bite back since he hasn't gotten any top front teeth. I looked at Jenny. She seemed so innocent. It was hard to believe she was a vampire. Sam came last. He carried a big present for Fudge, but he was crying. "It's just a stage he's going through," his mother explained. "Everything scares him, especially birthday parties. But he'll be fine. Won't you, Sam?" Sam grabbed onto his mother's leg and screamed, "Take me home! Take me home!" Somehow, Sam's mother untangled herself from Sam's grip and left. So at 1:05, we were ready to begin. We had an eater, a biter, and a crier. I thought that 2:30 would never come. I also thought my mother was slightly crazy for dreaming up the party in the first place. "Doesn't Fudge have any normal friends?" I whispered. "There's nothing wrong with Fudgy's friends," my mother whispered back. "All small children are like that." Grandma got them seated around the kitchen table. She put a party hat on each kid's head. Sam screamed, "Get it off! Get it off!" But the others wore their hats and didn't complain. My mother snapped a picture of them with her new camera. Then Grandma turned off the lights and my mother lit the candles on Fudge's cake. It had chocolate frosting and big yellow roses. I led the singing of Happy Birthday. My mother carried the cake across the kitchen to the party table and set it down in front of Fudge. Sam cried, "Too dark, too dark!" So Grandma had to turn on the kitchen lights before Fudge blew out his candles. When he was finished blowing, he reached out and grabbed a rose off his cake, and he shoved it into his mouth. "Oh, Fudge," my mother said, "look what you did." But Grandma said, "It's his birthday. He can do whatever he wants." So Fudge reached over and grabbed a second rose. I guess Fat Ralph couldn't stand seeing Fudge eat those yellow roses because he grabbed one too. By that time, the cake looked pretty messy. My mother, finally coming to her senses, took the cake away and sliced it up. Each kid got a Dixie cup, a small piece of cake, and some milk. But Jenny hollered, "Where's my rose? Want one too?" Because her slice of birthday cake didn't happen to have one. Mother explained that the roses were only decorations and there weren't enough to go around. Jenny seemed to accept that, but when Grandma stood over her to open up her Dixie, Jenny bit her on the hand. "She bit me," Grandma cried. "Did it break the skin?" my mother asked. "No, I don't think so," Grandma said, checking. "Good, then it's nothing to worry about," my mother told her. Grandma went into the bathroom to put some medicine on it anyway. She wasn't taking any chances. Ralph was the first one to finish his food. "More, more, more," he sang, holding up his empty plate. "I don't think you should give him any more," I whispered to my mother. "Look how fat he is now." "Oh, Peter, this is a party. Let him eat whatever he wants." "Okay," I said. "Why should I care how fat he gets?" My mother served Ralph a second piece of cake, and he threw up right after he finished it. Me and Grandma took the kids into the living room while my mother cleaned up the mess. Grandma told Fudge he could open his presents while his friends watched. Jenny brought him a musical Jack-in-the-Box. When you turn the handle around, it plays "Pop Goes the Weasel." And when you reach the part of the song about Pop, the top opens and a funny clown jumps up. Fudge loved it. He clapped his hands and laughed and laughed. But Sam started to scream. "No, no
take it away.
He hid his face in his hands and wouldn't look up until Grandma promised to put the jack-in-the-box in another room. Fudge opened Ralph's present next. It was a little wind-up car that ran all over the floor. I kind of liked it myself. So did Ralph, because he grabbed it away from Fudge and said, "Mine!" "No!" Fudge shouted. "Mine!" When my mother heard the racket, she ran in from the kitchen. She explained to Ralph that he had brought the car to Fudge because it was his birthday. But Ralph wouldn't listen. I guess my mother was afraid he might throw up again, and this time on the living room rug. So she begged Fudge to let Ralph play with the car for just a few minutes. But Ralph kept screaming it was his car, so Fudge started to cry. Finally, my mother took the car away and said, "Let's see what Sam brought you." Fudge liked that idea. He forgot about the little car as he ripped the paper and ribbon off Sam's package. It turned out to be a picture dictionary, the same kind of the Yarbies brought me a couple of months ago. Fudge got mad and he threw it when he saw it. "No," he yelled, "no more book!" He threw it across the room. "Fudge, that's terrible," my mother said. "You mustn't do that to the nice book." "No book," Fudge said. Sam cried.
"He doesn't like it. He doesn't like my present. I want to go home. I want to go home."
Grandma tried to comfort Sam while my mother picked up the book. She gathered the wrapping paper and ribbons and cards together. Fudge didn't even look at any of the birthday cards. Oh well, he can't read, so I guess it doesn't make any difference. "Peter," my mother said, "let's start the games. Now. Quick." I checked the time. I hoped the party was almost over, but no. It was only 1:30. Still an hour to go. I went into my room where I had blown up a lot of balloons. My mother had a party book, and it says 3-year-olds like to dance around with balloons. When I got back to the living room, Mom started the record player, and I handed each kid a balloon. But they just stood there looking at me. I thought, either the guy who wrote that party book is crazy, or I am. "Show them how, Peter," my mother said. "Take a balloon and demonstrate." I felt like one of the world's greatest living fools dancing around with a balloon. But it worked. As soon as the kids saw me doing it, they started doing it too. And the more they danced, the more they liked it. Until Jenny's balloon popped. That nearly scared Sam right out of his mind. He started yelling and crying. Fortunately, I had blown up 24 balloons. I was hoping they'd dance around the rest of the afternoon. Fudge got the idea of jumping up and down on the furniture, and the others liked that too. So instead of dancing with their balloons, that's what they did. And soon they were running from room to room, yelling and laughing and having a great time. Then the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Rudder. She lives in the apartment right under us. She wanted to know what was going on. She said it sounded like her ceiling was about to crash in on her any second. My mother explained that Fudge was having a little birthday party, and wouldn't she like to stay for a piece of cake? Sometimes my mother is really clever. So Grandma entertained Mrs. Rudder in the kitchen, while Fudge and his buddies jumped up and down on his new bed. It was delivered this morning. Fudge hasn't even slept in it yet. So naturally, when my mother found out what they were up to, she was mad. "Stop it right now," she said.
"New bed, big boy,"
Fudge told her. Was he proud? "You won't have a new big boy bed for long if you don't stop jumping on it," my mother told him. "I know. Let's all sit down on the floor and hear a nice story." My mother selected a picture book from Fudge's bookshelf.
"I heard that one,"
Jenny said when she saw the cover. "All right," my mother told her. "Let's hear this one." She held up another book.
"I heard that one too," Jenny said.
I think my mother was starting to lose her patience. But she chose a third book and said, "We'll all enjoy this one, even if we know it by heart. And if we do know it by heart, well, we can say it together." That's just what Jenny did. And when my mother skipped a page by mistake, Jenny was right there to remind her. If you ask me, my mother felt like biting Jenny by that time. When the story was over, it was 2:00, and Ralph was sound asleep on the floor. My mother told me to put him on Fudge's new bed while she took the rest of the children back to the living room. I tried, but I couldn't lift Ralph. He weighs a ton. So I left him sleeping on Fudge's floor and closed the door so he wouldn't hear any noise. On my way back to the living room, I wished the others would fall asleep too. Peter, my mother suggested, why don't you show them Dribble? Mom, Dribble's my pet. You don't go around using a pet to entertain a bunch of little kids. Didn't my mother know that? Please, Peter, my mother said. We've still got half an hour left and I don't know what to do with them anymore. Dribble! Fudge hollered. Dribble! 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 I guess Sam and Jenny liked the way that sounded because they started to shout, Dribble! 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 Even though they didn't know what they were talking about. Oh, all right, I said. I'll show you Dribble, but you've got to promise to be very quiet. You mustn't make a sound. You might scare him, okay? They all said okay. My mother went into the kitchen to chat with Grandma and Mrs. Rudder, and I went into my room and came back carrying Dribble in his bowl. I put my finger over my lips to remind Fudge and his friends to be quiet. It worked. At first, nobody said a word. I put Dribble down on a table. Fudge and Sam and Jenny stood over the bowl.
Oh, turtle,
Jenny said. Yes, Dribble's a turtle. My turtle, I said in a soft voice. See, Fudge whispered. They can all see, I told Fudge.
Nice turtle,
Sam said. I wondered why he wasn't afraid this time.
What does Dribble do?
Jenny asked. Do? He doesn't do anything special, I said. He's a turtle. He does turtle things.
Like what?
Jenny asked. What was this kid anyway? Well, I said, he swims around a little and he sleeps on his rock and he eats.
Does he make?
Jenny asked. Make, I asked.
Make a tinkle?
Oh, that. Well, sure, I guess so. Jenny laughed, and so did Sam and Fudge.
I make tinkles too. Want to see?
Jenny asked. No, I said.
See,
Fudge laughed, pointing at Jenny. Jenny had a big smile on her face. Next thing I knew, there was a puddle on the rug. Mom, I hollered, come quick. My mother dashed in from the kitchen. What, Peter? What is it? Look what Jenny just did, I said. What is that? My mother asked, eyeing the puddle. She made on the floor, I said, and on purpose. Oh, Jenny, my mother cried. You didn't.
Did do,
Jenny said. That was very naughty, my mother told her. You come with me. She scooped up Jenny and carried her into the bathroom. After that, Mom mopped up the puddle. Finally, the doorbell rang. It was 2:30. The party was over. I could hardly believe it. I was beginning to think it would never end. First, Ralph's mother came. She had to wake him up to get him out of the apartment. I guess even she couldn't carry him. Next, Jenny's mother came. Mom gave her Jenny's wet pants in a baggie. That was all she had to do. Jenny's mother was plenty embarrassed. Sam's mother came last, but he didn't want to go home. Now that he was used to us, I guess he liked us. He cried,
More party, more.
Another time, his mother said, dragging him out of our apartment by the arm. My mother flopped down in a chair. Grandma brought her 2 aspirins and a glass of water. Here, dear, she said, maybe these will help. My mother swallowed the pills. She held her head. 3 is kind of young for a party, I told my mother. Peter Warren Hatcher, my mother began. Yes, I asked. You are absolutely right. I flapped down next to my mother. She put her arm around me. Then we both watched Fudge work his new Jack-in-the-Box. Later, when my father came home, he said, How did Fudge's party go? My mother and I looked at each other, and we laughed. That was a lot of party, wasn't it? Little kids' birthday parties are tricky, even if they don't last very long. Next, we're going to read Chapter 6, Fang hits the town. Fudge liked his new bed a lot. There was just one problem. He fell out of it every night. By the fourth night, my mother and father got smart. They pushed the bed against the wall and surrounded the other side with chairs. Now there was no place for Fudge to fall. But every morning, my mother found him curled up in one of the chairs. My father said they could have saved their money since Fudge was so happy sleeping in an old chair. On Saturday, he had to go to the dentist. He wanted to check Fudge's mouth again to make sure everything healed all right since his flying experience. Dr. Brown is an old friend of my father's. They went to school together. He's always saying he takes special good care of me and Fudge because we are chips off the old block. The old block being my father. His office is on the other side of the park. It's near Madison Avenue. My mother said we make a day of it, and wouldn't that be fun? I'd rather go to the movies with Jimmy Fargo, I told her. But we'll have such a good time, my mother said. The three of us will go out for lunch, and then we'll get those new shoes for you and Fudge. I've been out to lunch with Fudge, reminded her. He's growing up, Peter. He knows how to behave now. I'd still rather go to the movies with Jimmy. Well, you're coming with me, and that's that. I wasn't looking forward to my day. And Saturday morning is always the best day of the week. Every Saturday morning, I clean out Dribble's bowl. Sometimes if Fudge is very good, I let him watch. I do it in the bathroom. First, I take Dribble out of his bowl and let him crawl around in the tub. I'm afraid to put him down on the floor because somebody might step on him. But in the tub, I know he's safe. Next, I take the rocks out of the bowl and wash them. The last thing I do is wash the bowl itself. I really scrub it. I even rinse it 2 or 3 times to make sure all the soap is out. When I'm done with that, I put the rocks back in and fill it with just the right amount of water. After I put Dribble back in his bowl, I feed him, and usually he goes right to sleep on his favorite rock. I guess running around in the bathtub really makes my turtle tired. Today I finished with Dribble just in time. My mother was rushing, mumbling about getting us to Dr. Brown's office in time for our appointment. When we were outside, we took the crosstown bus and then walked a few blocks to the office. As soon as the nurse saw Fudge, she said, "How's my favorite patient?" She gave him a hug and a little book to read. To me, she said, "Good morning, Peter." It burns me up the way people treat Fudge. He's not so special. He's just little, that's all. But someday, he's going to be 9 years old too, and I can't wait until he is. Then he'll know there's nothing so great about him after all. Soon the nurse said, "Fudge, Dr. Brown is ready for you. Come with me now." Fudge took the nurse's hand. Dr. Brown has this rule about mothers in the examining room with kids. They're not allowed. Mothers are a big problem. Dr. Brown told me once, and I agreed. I looked through a National Graphic magazine while I waited. After a few minutes, the nurse came out and whispered something to my mother. I looked up, wondering what the big secret was. Then my mother said, "Peter, Dr. Brown would like you to help him with Fudge." "Help him?" I said. "I'm no dentist." The nurse said, "Peter, dear, if you'll just come with me, I'm sure everything will work out fine." So I went with the nurse. "What do I have to do?" I asked her. "Oh, not much. Dr. Brown just wants to show Fudge how you open your mouth and how he checks your teeth." "What do I have to do that for?" I asked. "I don't need a checkup yet. I just had one last month." "Your brother won't open his mouth this morning," the nurse whispered. "He won't?" I whispered back. "No, he won't," she said again. I thought that was pretty funny. I never considered refusing to open my mouth at the dentist's office. When he says open, I open. When we reached the examining room, Fudge was sitting in the big chair. He had a towel around his neck, and he looked all ready for action. Dr. Brown was showing him lots of little things and explaining what he does with each one. Fudge kept nodding, but he wouldn't open his mouth. "Ah, Peter," Dr. Brown said when he saw me, Would you open your mouth so I can count your teeth?" That's what he tells little kids he's doing, counting their teeth. Little kids will believe anything. I went along with Dr. Brown's joke. I opened my mouth very wide, much wider than when I'm the real patient. He put his mirror in and said, "Wonderful teeth, just beautiful, a regular chip off the old block. Such a shame your brother can't open his mouth the way that you do."
can sew,
Fudge said. No, Dr. Brown told him. You can't open your mouth nearly as good as Peter.
Can sew, see?
Fudge opened his mouth. No, I'm sorry, Fudge, Dr. Brown said. It's still not as good as Peter. So Fudge opened his mouth really wide.
Count teeth, he said. Count Fudge's teeth.
Well, Dr. Brown pretended to think about it.
Count,
Fudge shouted. Well, Dr. Brown said again, scratching his head. I guess as long as you're here, I might as well count your teeth. So he checked Fudge's mouth. When he saw through Fudge, when he was through, Fudge said,
see, just like Peter.
Yes, Dr. Brown said, smiling. I can see that. You're just like Peter. And he gave me a wink. I liked the way Dr. Brown tricked Fudge into opening his mouth. So when he was through examining him, I whispered, couldn't you make Fudge some false teeth until his grown-up ones come in? Oh, no, he'll just have to wait, Dr. Brown said. But he looks like he has fangs, I told him. You'd better not say that in front of your mother, Dr. Brown said. I know it. She's not too big on fangs. Dr. Brown thanked me for helping him. My mother made another appointment for Fudge. The nurse kissed my brother goodbye, and we left. That wasn't so bad, was it, Peter? My mother asked. It could have been worse, I admitted. We headed for Bloomingdale's, where we got our shoes. There are 5 salesmen in the children's shoe department. 2 of them my mother doesn't like. She thinks they don't measure my feet carefully. That all they care about is selling shoes, even if they don't have the right sizes in stock. The other ones my mother thinks are okay. But there's one she likes a lot. His name is Mr. Berman. I like him too, because he's funny. He usually makes believe that the right shoe goes on the left foot, or that Fudge's shoes are really for me. Anyway, when Mr. Berman waits on us, buying shoes is almost fun. Today, Mr. Berman spotted us right away. He always remembers our name.
Well, if it isn't the Hatcher boys, he said.
In the flesh, I told him. Fudge opened his mouth for Mr. Berman.
See, all gone.
His teeth, my mother explained to Mr. Berman. He knocked out his top 2 front teeth. Well, congratulations, Mr. Berman said. That calls for a celebration. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 lollipops. He handed one to me and one to Fudge.
Oh, Fudge said, lolly.
Mine was root beer flavored. I hate root beer. But I thanked Mr. Berman anyway. I'll save it for after lunch, I told him, handing it to my mother. She put it into her purse. Fudge got a lemon lolly. He ripped off the paper and started sucking right away. Now then, what'll it be, boys? Mr. Berman asked. My mother answered, brown and white saddles for Fudge and loafers for Peter. Okay, Peter, let's see how those feet have grown. I slipped out of my old shoes and stood up. I stuck my left foot into Mr. Berman's foot measure. Then he turned it around and I put my right foot in. That's another reason why my mother thinks Mr. Berman is good at selling shoes. He measures both feet. Some other salesmen only measure one. My mother says feet can be different sizes, even on the same person. And it's important to make sure the size fits the biggest foot. What color loafers, Peter? Mr. Berman asked. Brown, I said, same as my old ones. When Mr. Berman went into the back to look for shoes for me, my mother noticed a hole in the toe of my sock. Oh, Peter, why didn't you tell me you had a hole in your sock? I didn't know I had one, I said. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. It's my sock, Mom. Why should you be embarrassed? I asked. Well, it looks terrible. I mean, to come shopping for shoes with a hole in your sock? That's just awful. Can you hide it a little? Where should I hide it? Try to get the hole in between your toes so it doesn't show, my mother said. I wiggled my sock around, trying to rearrange my hole. My mother sure worries about silly things. Mr. Berman came out with 2 pairs of loafers. He likes to try different sizes to make sure I'm getting the right one. One pair was much too big. The other pair fit fine. Wear or rep? Mr. Berman asked my mother. Rep, please, she said. We'll wear the old ones home. I have never been allowed to wear new shoes home from the store. Don't ask me why. But my mother always has the new pair wrapped up, and I can't wear them until the next day. When I was finished, Mr. Berman untied Fudge's shoes and measured his feet. Brown and white saddle shoes, my mother reminded him. Mr. Berman went into the back and returned with 2 shoe boxes. But when he opened the first box and Fudge saw the saddle shoes, he said, "No." "No what?" my mother asked him. "No shoes," Fudge said. He started kicking his feet. "Don't be silly, Fudgy, you need new shoes," my mother told him. "No, no, no," he hollered. Everybody in the shoe department looked over at us. "Here's the perfect size," Mr. Berman told Fudge, holding up one shoe. "Wait till you see how nice these new shoes will feel." Fudge kicked some more. It was impossible for Mr. Berman to get his shoes on his feet. He screamed, "No shoes! No, no, no!" My mother grabbed hold of him, but he was wriggling all around. He managed to give Mr. Berman a kick in the face. Lucky for him, Fudge only had on socks. "Now look, Fudgy," my mother said. "You must get new shoes. Your old ones are too small. So what kind do you want?" I don't know why my mother bothered to talk to him like he was a regular person. Because when Fudge gets himself into a temper tantrum, he doesn't listen to anything. By that time, he had thrown himself onto the floor while he beat his fists against the rug. "What kind do you want, Fudge? Because we're not leaving here until you have new shoes." My mother said it like she meant it. I figured we'd be there for the rest of the day, or maybe the week. How could my mother have been embarrassed over a little hole in my sock and then act like nothing much was happening when her other son was on the floor yelling and screaming and carrying on? "I'm going to count to 3, my mother told Fudge, "and then I want you to tell me which shoes you want. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fudge sat up. "Like Pita's," he said. I smiled. I guess the kid really looks up to me. He even wants to wear the same kind of shoes. But everybody knows you can't buy loafers for such a little guy. "They don't come in your size," Mr. Berman told Fudge. "Yes, yes, yes, like Pita's," Fudge hollered. Mr. Berman held up his hands and looked at my mother as if to say, "I give up." But my mother said, "I have an idea." She motioned for me and Mr. Berman to come closer. I had the feeling I wasn't going to like her idea, but I listened anyway. I think we'll have to play a little joke on Fudge," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, suppose Mr. Berman brings out a pair of saddle shoes in your size and—" "Oh, no," I said. "You're not going to get me to wear saddle shoes. Never." "Let me finish," my mother said. "Mr. Berman can bring them out and you can try them on, and then Fudge will think that's what you're getting. But when we leave, we'll take the loafers." "That's mean," I said. "You're taking advantage of him." "Since when do you worry about that?" my mother asked. "Since now," I told her. "Look, Peter," my mother said, checking her watch. "It's 12 o'clock. I'm starved." "Me too," I said. "Well, then, if you ever want to get some lunch, let's try my idea." Okay, I said. I sat back in my chair while Mr. Berman hurried into the stockroom again. Fudge looked up at me from his position on the floor. "Like Pita's," he said. "Yeah, sure, Fudge," I told him. Mr. Berman came back with a pair of brown and white saddle shoes in my size. I tried them on. Ugh, did they look ugly. "See Peter's nice saddle shoes?" my mother said. "Now Fudgy tries on his nice saddle shoes." Fudge let Mr. Berman get him into his new pair of shoes. "See," he said, "see, like Pita's." He held up a foot. "That's right, Fudge," I said, "just like mine." You sure can fool little kids easy. "Wear a wrap?" Mr. Berman asked my mother while Fudge walked around in his new shoes. "A wrap, of course," she said. I wondered what my mother would tell Fudge tomorrow when I wore my new loafers. Oh well, that really wasn't my worry. It was her idea. When Fudge was back in his old shoes, our package was ready. Mr. Berman gave my brother a striped balloon. He offered one to me too, but I refused. How could he think a person in 4th grade might want a shoe store balloon? "That wasn't so terrible, was it, Peter?" my mother said as we left the store. "It wasn't?" I asked. "Well, it could have been worse," my mother said as we left the store. I suppose, I answered. We went to Hamburger Heaven for lunch. We sat in a booth. Fudge tossed his balloon around while my mother ordered for him and then for herself. I ordered my own lunch, a hamburger with everything on it and a chocolate milkshake. Fudge was getting a kiddie special, meaning a hamburger without the roll, some mashed potatoes, and a side order of green peas. When our lunch was served, my mother cut Fudge's hamburger into tiny pieces, which he shoved into his mouth with his fingers. Then she handed him a spoon and told him to eat his mashed potatoes. But instead of eating them, he smeared them on the wall. See, he said. I thought you told me he wouldn't behave like that anymore, I said to my mother. Fudgy, that's naughty. You stop it right now, my mother said. But Fudge sang, eat it or wear it. And he dumped the whole dish of peas over his head. I laughed. I couldn't help it. He looked so silly with the peas falling from his hair. And when I eat and laugh at the same time, I choke. So I choked on my pickle, and my mother had to whack me on the back, which gave Fudge another chance to spread mashed potato on the wall. That's when the waitress asked my mother, did we want anything else? No, thank you, my mother said. We have more than enough. She wiped off the wall with her napkin and told Fudge he was very, very naughty. Not me, Fudge said. Not me. Yes, you, my mother told him. Why can't you eat like Peter? See how nice Peter eats? Fudge didn't say anything. He just stuck his fork into his balloon. It popped and he screamed. Oh, go on, want more balloon, more. Shut up, I told him. Can't you ever act human? That's enough, Peter, my mother said. She should have slugged him. That would teach that brother of mine how to behave in Hamburger Heaven. We took a cab home. Fudge fell asleep on the way. He had his fingers in his mouth and made his slurping noises. My mother whispered to me, Our day wasn't that bad, was it, Peter? I didn't answer. I just looked out the taxi window and decided that I would never spend a day with Farley Drexel Hatcher again. And you remember that is Fudge's real name, Farley Drexel Hatcher. Boy, oh boy, that Fudge is a real corker. That's what I call him. He gives them a run for their money, don't they? All right, so next week we'll read about the Flying Train Committee. That sounds interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. There's so many adventures. Every day you never know what's going to happen with Fudge. How about we spread some joy? All right. I know those chapters were a little bit longer, but it was kind of fun to see how Fudge was going to end up in that shoe store tantrum. That's for sure. All right. Here we go. You ready? How are we going to spread our joy today? Thank your teachers. I love it. I think Wednesday we were thanking our parents. Now we get to thank our teachers because boy, are they working hard this year. We have some kids in school. We have some kids online. Sometimes we have to go online depending on what the virus is doing. So everyone is working very hard to make sure you are learning and you're growing and your brains are getting bigger all through this crazy school year. So please thank your teachers. You can send them a message in Google Classroom. You could even do it on the weekend. What a surprise that would give them when they check their Google Classroom and see that all you sent them was a message of thanks. Go ahead and try that. That would be amazing. All right, boys and girls, we're heading into the weekend. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep spreading your joy.